All right, we're back. This is video 2. This will be Dan with Fed and Happy. I'm going to start you out with some pictures. We went and visited his building there in Kansas. 300,000 square feet. Yes, you heard that right. 300,000 square feet of worms and castings. I'm going to show you a couple pictures and I'm going to start the video. Remember, if you guys push that notification bell, you'll be able to follow all series of the worm conference.
Probably get a decent microscope and learn how to take a look at it. If you run your tea for 24 hours and you look under there and you're not seeing lots of movement, there's something going wrong, and that's the time to start investigating. Get a chemist to help you figure out why it is or is not doing what you want it to do. Any other questions? Cool. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, no problem. Very much.
Oh, cleaning is fun. Cleaning is just, if it's stainless steel, I highly recommend stainless steel non-porous, so you don't have to worry about soap and all that jazz. But if you got something plastic, which is less expensive, so it's more practical for lots of folks, but that is something you want to, just like dish soap, like nothing crazy, dish soap and a brush and scrub it down. You don't want to leave any biofilm under your gear, so if you see an accumulation of brown, you're not cleaning well enough. But for stainless steel, essentially just scrub it down, give it a good hosing at the end, you should be golden. And any closed, small opening, just make sure you run a pipe cleaner through there every now and again.
You're going to see tomorrow the evolution of our tea brewing process. We started with a conical 50-gallon tank that I bought used for $25 or $50. We eventually went to the stainless steel. It's just a stout, predominantly a beer brewery thing, but it's stainless steel and you just close it off and it cleans really fast. When I got to where I was making tea 4 or 5 times a week, I couldn't spend an hour every day making that. So it got way cheaper to buy one than where I didn't have to. I'm going to transition to Dan here. Right here. Oh, looking right after, right in the sun. Do we have a mic for Dan?
Sure.
So Dan Rasher runs Fed and Happy Worms and is doing some really fascinating projects with a variety of large-scale farms. And there were so many of you here that were interested in worm, in using teas and other things in larger farm settings, that I thought you could really get a lot out of what Dan has to say. So we're going to see if we can get him hooked up here. For 2 weeks, 75 degrees and no wind. Let's stop hanging out there. Yeah.
It'd be worse. It'd be a fire.
Yeah, that's 100%. Is that coming?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dan Rager with Fed and Happy. We're based in Evanston, Kansas, and we are a 300,000 square foot worm farm set up with our predominant purpose of producing worm castings. But as most of you know, producing worm castings takes a little bit of time, and out of some happenstance, also started selling worms. But originally we seeded our started a breeding operation, got up to about 1,000 breeding bins, and then from there we seeded our worm farm with about 650 to 750 pounds of worms per week for about 3/4 of a year until we had it all built out. And our goal is to always be processing about 10,000 tons worth of castings on about a 2-year running cycle. That changes a little bit with demand. And then we have about 1,000 ton staging area. That staging area started out as, a couple yards, then it moved to a couple tons, 5 tons, and then just up to the point where it's at now. Part of the reason why we had that huge staging area is that we want the consistency for our growers, our customers, on a year in, year out basis. But also, at some point, we want to get our moisture down where it is drinkable. And then also in that last part of that process, we're able to increase our fungi levels some more. So in that staging area, that material may be in those staging rows anywhere from 6 weeks to 3 to 4 months, depending on where we're at in the season. But before I get too far, I'm going to put a couple people on the spot. Robert disappeared.
Oh, I came back.
Oh, came back. So I'm going to have Robert and Tyler, who have both seen our facility. I'm going to have them talk about it real quick.
If any of you got kids and you play hide and go seek with your kids, you won't see them for a week. I'll put it that way. It is a monster. I got pictures too if anybody wants to see them.
Yeah, it's a massive facility, and it's a really great product to be produced there. We apply it all over our farm on every single acre for 2 years.
So with everything you guys have heard today, how many of you guys want to be like us? Well, I'm going to tell you all the reasons why you don't want to be like us. And also why, even everything that Zach said about, when we work together, we can help get you guys into business much faster. But I think even in the long term, you're going to find that buying castings and worms from somebody like us allows for a lot more profitability and allows for you guys to spend the time doing things that allow you to make more money. That everything you see in our pictures and talking about it, it's all expensive. And while 10,000 tons, when it's manure and wood chips and grains, doesn't seem like that much, for the most part, it's a non-bankable asset. And having millions of dollars of worm castings doesn't really do anything to most people. But also the fact that, it's 2 years in the making. And if we don't start it, we can't answer that call that, yep, we have it ready for you. So that's, when we started, it was truly if we build it, they will come. And if I had to do all over again, I don't know if I would have built it like that. But at the same time, I'm looking at, our ag side has grown so much, and we've worked a lot on our application side of ag that I believe by our 26th season into our 27th season, we should be able to sell out our production entirely. But that's only because we've worked so hard on the application side as well as some of our different formulas. Our most premium product, technically our super fine worm casting, is actually the product that we sell the least of, even though we produce the most of it. So that product we sell to people like Zach or yourself, but our ag side uses mostly our other products that are a blend or looking for a different fungal or a different food that may still be in there and also may flow better or go through an extractor better. Which brings us to our liquid side. Our liquid side is twofold. Until probably about 18 months ago, we were fully in the camp that buy castings from us, have your own extractor, whether that be an IBC code, something like what Zach has, or one of the more expensive extractors on the market, a core unit, a Hiwaffle unit, bioproducts unit. And in the last 18 months, that's kind of shifted that, yes, we support that. We have some additive packs for that. but at the same time, we also produce our own liquids. And what we do to our liquids before it becomes an extract is really critical to us on collecting our rainwater, then our fish aspects, then our floating worm beds. And so, from a growth standpoint, both our castings and our liquids have grown about the same, but they get sold at somewhat different times of the year and also somewhat the same. And I used to say that our castings went out to farther distances, but in the last 18 months, our liquids have gone coast to coast as well. But the part that we want to and have explored the most is how we can continue to go and ship worms to producers like yourself in castings. I feel like it's the best. It's where we fit better. We're not one for, we have a website, we'll sell them by the pound, but we'd much rather ship lots of 10, 20, 40 pounds. And the last 2 years, we have had some production issues. Last year, our 23 season, we had some ups and downs with our production coming off of, our winter was a little bit rough on us. At that time, we sold all worms for Petco on their red wigglers as well, and put us on a little bit of a deficit in the winter. Even though we are indoors, we're not a heated facility, so our heat is based on the system or our system. And then this year we had storm damage, and I'm not. We'll see it here in a second. So we lost about 8,000 square feet of our building, which in most buildings would be a massive. For us, it's a pretty small portion, but it has caused us massive issues with our city, and we've spent a bulk of the last 6 months locked out of our building, locked out of our castings, and our worms.
So they tagged you out.
Yeah. So we've had a lot of turnover within the administration of the city. There's another hotel that they, after 4 years, successfully got torn down, and then turned their sights on us, but they can tear us down too. And what's that? Yep, we're right by the airport. And kind of some bad timing. Also, they just see it as dirt. They don't see anything that we do as a real business. And knowing that we knew that the city could be somewhat critical. Previously, I stored grain in this building, and it took a massive amount of effort to get it all approved. And when I started, it started with a continuous flow through bin, and then a second one, and I would bring worms, and then every week I'd bring another truckload or two of manure in until we got up to that 10,000 tons. And I mean, it did hit a flywheel effect when we grew it, but for the most part, it looked like a vacant building outside. And we had people parked out there, but almost everything we did got packaged and shipped, and some in the U.S., some in Canada, and we didn't advertise. It was all word of mouth. And so the city left us alone, we left them alone, and then when we had this collapse, which you'll see, I think in just a second. It got left out. So just completely collapsed right over our shipping. We have 2 sets of shipping docks, and we were just about ready to move all of our liquids. This was a big growth year for liquids on us, and we wanted to move to having 50,000 gallons worth of load out capacity at any one given time. And so we had just started moving that process, and then that next night we had 85-mile-an-hour winds and collapses. And we had 2 overhead cranes that had been sitting there, probably just fatigue in that area. So coming out of the hand, that is just some castings mixed with the biochar. In our process, we're always looking at how we can improve that casting. And so biochar is one of those aspects. But biochar is also one of, or for us, it is the most politically sensitive input we can have. And our access to biochar for us is almost always dependent on how much California is willing to pay for green credits that month. And so we have to really stockpile it up. But again and again, studies are now just starting to come out that if you put biochar in the beginning instead of the end, it has a significantly better impact on the soil of the plant. But again, from a carrying capacity, when we're at anywhere from 24 to 36 months, that adds a lot more to that non-bankable asset that you get sitting in there. So right here, this is the picture. So our system is designed as a worm pasture. Where most systems, and even out here, you've got single windrows. So over time, so we started with a windrow and then started with a modified wedge where we just kept building that wedge. Until we got to about 60 feet wide and up to 900 feet long. And we have 3 bays like that. And then once it became time to harvest, instead of just cutting through that and taking it all out, we harvest that in a finger aspect. So instead of like a windrow cutting off your arm, we put a gash in it and then we backfeed it and let the system heal itself. One, it's better for us on a worm perspective because the worms come into that new material, but also from a fungi perspective, the fungi really comes in there and creates a strong system. And anybody in here have a plant meter? The audio plant meter?
You know I do.
Have you put it on your worm bed?
No.
So the other, and I know I've shared it with Andrew, but I've never actually got one bought myself. But we know that fungi talk over long periods of distances. And I just read an article today that supposedly they have up to 50 words actually in their vocabulary. And it's not just frequencies, it's actually more complicated than that. And so going with that, with the cover cropping that we do in our system, I've always wanted to put that plant meter on there and really see what our frequencies are doing. And because and a big aspect of why we go with this big system is again that consistency. That it's who knows what a Johnson stew is in here? No, most of you. So I think a Johnson stew can be great, but it also relies on a little bit of luck. But then also the second year, getting the same Johnson stew you got this year as you did last year is really hard. So knowing that our growers, they wanted the easy button. They wanted something that year after year was going to be at least better than what they got the year before. So we need that big mass. So that's why that cutting system and going to that frequency is one way that I'd like to monitor in the future, because most of the testing that we do neglects the bulk of the work that we're doing. Our stored metabolites, our amino acids, our hormones don't get recorded, and definitely not at the concentration level that we want for the soil test. So coming back to this worm pasture, this is a very small version of what we do. That worm pasture is actually built here. The other reason why our style of raising worms, we like it. It provides, I compare it to a feedlot approach based instead of a pasture based. The pasture gives us a lot more resiliency. The reproduction is a shade lower than what you'd see in a typical high-intense breeding system than what you've already heard about today, but it gives us much more stability. It's easier on the worms, higher health on the worms, and then when we ship those worms out to customers, they're ready to breathe, ready to eat, better color, and then the epigenetics that we've now had the same worm family within our system for so many years that they're used to that organic food, non-GMO, and as few chemicals as possible. So whether that be our feedstocks or our manures, we're constantly looking at what our worms are eating to keep that reproduction as high as possible. But the problem with a worm pasture is that it takes a while to set up. And as much as we've tried to rush it, especially on client properties, it takes about 2 years for a worm pasture to really get over. Part of that is the fact that there's so much food in there that the worms can stay very happy. They don't need to be on the surface for a while. They're in there, they're happy, they're doing their work, and especially the way we build it, we want that thing to be from top to bottom. And then the next aspect, pass 3, is as you see in the wedges that, as those wedges age, they're losing the ability to go and cycle oxygen through there. Just as things are getting smaller, things are getting more compact. So we try to size things heavier because of that, but also part of the reason we use the algae in our floating worm bed, which right here's a picture of our floating worm bed. That one has about 15,000 gallons on it, but it's got about 9 inches worth of floating material on it, filled with worms, and that material is going into that liquid. It's aerated underneath, and then that liquid is fed out to our worms. And within that, we're constantly feeding that with broccoli, rice. We'll plant some bushes in there. We're trying to get the exudates out of those plants different times of the season in order to get that into our system, which then becomes either part of our extracts or part of our castings.
Worm castings, you like how do you harvest worm pasture? How do you feed?
So the feeding, so we build a ration every week with grains, some forage products, a little bit of roughage in there, and then we hand feed it depending on how much we have available. Now, depending on our stocks, we may not be able to feed everything with the same rate, and so we're also cycling around. We try to never harvest the same area within the same and so then also within that food, if we're about ready to harvest it, it may get a food that is much more palatable to everything versus the next week, it's going to get something that has more air, not quite as palatable, but knowing that, we're not going to come back to that area from a harvest standpoint for a few weeks. Because the other aspect is that with a lot of our foods, just us moving around in hand and harvesting that, it helps keep that surface healthy. So if we're not going to do that, we need to put something on that surface that's going to keep that breathability and keep it stable. And so, most people go and harvest their worms with a trommel, but I think it puts a lot of stress on the worms that then you see from a reproduction standpoint, and we see, worms, just the weight of a worm can radically change, and sending them through a trommel is pretty hard on them. And so they get hand sorted, hand harvested to minimize that stress as much as possible.
Since you use biochar, do you inoculate again?
It depends. If we're putting in, let's say, and it really depends on where we're at on manure at that different time. And so if our manure has been hot, then typically we'll get a little bit of inoculation when it's coming in with that manure. If our manure is coming in and we're mixing biochar at the same time, right, and then manure is going to go through a hot phase after that, then there's typically no inoculation because because the manure's gonna, or the biochar is gonna pull that. And some of that depends on time of the year for us too. That where we're using our system for heat, you know, where we're at in the cycle. So the other aspect of us harvesting in fingers and then taking out, say 8 feet here, 8 feet here, then we're also creating heat zones too, that then get spread out over a wider area. So we like as big as we can buy. One, because it's just gonna break. You know, once it runs through a trommel, a machine, and knowing that we're gonna have our main area, then go to a staging area, and then through the trommel. If it comes back to the system, that's fine. And if it ends up just being a little bit bigger, well, we know that that's gonna go to an ag mix, so that's fine. But again, going back to, we want to do everything we can to keep the system breathing, and so biochar is going to break down a lot less than say it would get. Yep, concrete floor, which is both, it's very good, but also, you know, we still have spots that, I mean, there'll be a spot where that water wants to go straight down. So that consistency in our watering, we put a lot of water onto it, and we have a lot of water that we have to pull off of it. So I think our big thing is that it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of tied up capital that goes into it. All the equipment is expensive, and your excitement on your business is going to be the most in your first couple of years. From your customer base, they want to buy product, you want to sell them product, you need to sell them product. There is good sources to buy material, to buy worms, create your own mixes, or have us ship a mix to you. And it was something that we looked at doing in 19 as well, and got super close on the worm side. And ironically glad we didn't, because found out we would have bought blues. And where we bought our worms, it was all red. It was a very old worm farm. And she said, we'll sell you worms, but you have to come sort. And I'm like, oh, that's great. We can learn. And with that, I'm like, you know, we don't want to be in the worm sale business. It's just like, she was not making any money selling worms to us. And so 18, 19, the going rate for worms was probably $15, $17 a pound. And honestly, I don't think the sellers of worms were making money. And it was, you know, I threw out a number of 30, 35 in 20, not really expecting to buy it, or anybody to buy it on a wholesale basis, and then somebody just bought it, and then running. But then, you know, inflation the last couple of years, you know, our costs have gone up significantly, but that worm price on the wholesale basis really hasn't gone up that much after that initial jump. The other side that we really face on the larger side is insurance. You know, worms over the last 4 or 5 years are getting a little bit more notoriety on NAICS codes and insurance, but for the most part, we're categorized as fertilizer, especially if you have a Department of Commerce or an insurance company that only looks at the first 4 digits. Well, then you're in a processed fertilizer, and we got a surcharge on insurance that doubled our insurance rate, tripled. We went in about September. You know, that was a huge hit, just because, you know, we got a new underwriter, sell fertilizer. We had an accident, a truck accident, and hammered us on all our replacements. So be very proactive on your insurance. Focus on your GL. Also thinking about it, you know, we work a lot on the agronomy side, and so agronomy on the farmers, you know, that protection, working with the agronomists, and sometimes we forget that we're in a $1 trillion industry. So looking at what can we do bad, what are we doing good, but what's our worst case outcome as well. And so I know Daniel just talked a lot about teas. We don't make teas. We make extracts, and part of it is that teas, when they sit too long, bad things can happen. When they've been fed, and also the ag industry loves sugar right now. And I don't like sugar in our own lives, and I hate it on the ag basis as well, because it hurts diversity. Yes, you see a pop in overall in biology counts, but you hurt the diversity that you spent a long time with. So we feed a steak and potato, or essentially a steak and potato diet to our worms and our system the whole process, and I believe that they need that same type of diet in the soil to be successful. When you give it sugar, you're going to see a pop, but you're also going to see a crash, or you're going to see a loss of diversity that you need for that overall terrestrial soil. So, putting in the tea, for us, just poses too much risk going out to growers that, it's not uncommon for a grower to say, oh yeah, I agitated. I just drove up and down the road as fast as I could. That'll work, won't it? But I got busy and I didn't get enough for a week. And so that was a very early lesson that, we're just not going to be in the tea market in too much risk. And even on the extract market, an extract is built to be stable, but it also has life. And so extract, it has a value in the first couple weeks, or there's a value in the first day, there's a value in the first couple weeks, and then there's a value that still is there for a very significant period of time. The metabolites, the humics, and honestly, I think the jury's still out on where it's most valuable. And I saw a lot of really conflicting data. Some of our best yield bumps came from extracts that the growers were treated like absolute crap. But we have algal in them that are constantly bringing oxygen into that extract, continuing that cycling. We know with the biochar that that's also mobilizing aspects as well. So when we put it under a microscope, even after 2-3 weeks, especially if it's gotten turned over once a day, it's still going to have good life in it. It is going to reduce some of its type A in there because that gets consumed as food, but it's still going to have good life. And I think one thing that we're going to see on Johnson Sioux extracts potentially in the next year, more data coming out, is that Johnson Sioux biology really living when we put it out in the field? Start seeing some that, all it's doing is serving as food for what was already in the field because it doesn't have the resilience of the cows to bring. Similar to a bug in a jug, I believe that, the biology that you have from bug in a jug or from ours, it may look like the same bacillus and pillis, but in my opinion, having stuff that is raised in a pasture, raised more naturally, it has harvest, courage, and I'm hoping that over the next few years we can actually start seeing that coming out of microscope in some way. That's one aspect that we're seeing in the field on drop bars. So we do, and early on, organic farmers were a bigger part of our liquid and granular business because they needed non-synthetic options. And Amish Mennonite, we do well with them, but I think for different reasons. So we may be thinking, I see that we do well with them because they tend to be a little bit more open-minded. Like, they know that they're constricted in what their options are, so they're more open-minded into how to fix their problem. Or they know that, I'm going to have to keep putting manure out in this field every year, but my agronomist says I've got a phosphorus problem. I need to fix it. And so using the extracts, using the potassium to help utilize that. And also, we see a lot of Amish that they're in a market garden. I mean, it may be a very large market garden, but they're getting paid more premium prices, and so they're looking for those options of how to get more premium product as well. And also, we have one Mennonite farm that it's fun to show up because the kids are all running in bare feet, and the parents love the extracts. And part of it is because their farm doesn't smell like Roundup, and the kids are out there playing, and if somebody gets doused in worm extract, well, it was just
They grow faster.
a little bit smelly shower, and they're laughing about it. And so when we see that it's growing, that people care about what they're putting on and what their kids are around to. And so, but from that organic aspect, there are far more conventional farmers using extracts than what you'd realize. And they're using it because it's winning. Our best cost savings was about 60% nitrogen savings this past year, and we still won on yield. And one of the ironic things about working with the city right now is that, one of the council members brought up, they're like, we just spent money fixing a nitrogen problem because of runoff. We have a company locally that helps farmers reduce the nitrogen runoff, and we're trying to be difficult on them. This doesn't really make sense. And so I think it's, and that's why going back to the selling aspect is that, we can argue, is there enough production out there or not? But one thing I know that we don't have enough people talking about worms, talking about castings. And with the new administration, it's going to be interesting. And right after the election, I thought it was interesting how people were defending red dye 40. Like, oh, it's only one ingredient. It's not all of the ingredients that RFK was saying, and we're going to see some of the same stuff on the ag side too. And it doesn't really matter if policy doesn't change, just talking about it is going to create that opportunity. And one thing I found is that people are a lot more fascinated about worms than what you think. And I'm sure every one of you experienced that as well, or had a significant other, or had family members that have said, can we just not say that you're a worm farmer? And then everybody in the room that you just go meet, like, oh, you raise worms, well, tell me about that. They won't shut up about it.
On Science Friday not too long ago, I heard last on Science Friday on NPR, interviewed some guy that said that one of the ways they test soil is with a sound sensor tested on the soil. Noisy soil proves to be live soil, flat soil.
It makes sense. Like the frequency, like I've watched this plant weight for several years now, and I still can't believe that I haven't bought it and used it because, never mind. I know why I haven't bought it is because I know as soon as we hook it up, I want to have 20 different experiments going on. That, okay, well, what if we do this cover crop, this crop? And if we go and harvest, well, all of a sudden that it's singing a completely different sound. Well, oh, we just damaged that system. Or if when we water, it does something else. Like, and that's the goal, so we get to that standpoint of, when the system is singing this, then we know that we're healthy. But I also know that it probably could be a distraction getting to that point right now.
So you don't have to stabilize your
So we stabilize it. So it's stabilized with, we put a lot of humics in it just from our system and the fact that our system is very humic heavy between our biochar and just the fact that worm castings itself are very humus. And then our algals are our other big stabilizer. But does that mean that we had the same life right after it comes out of the extractor versus in 2 weeks? No. but it doesn't mean that it's still not very good. And it also goes to the aspect that the bulk of an extract isn't necessarily the light, it's really all the metabolites, it's all the storage, it's the hormones, it's the enzymes, and that, for the last 5 years, I believe that we were 6 months away from having good tests to show the farmer that, okay, we've got these concentrations that this enzyme, this hormone, to do this for your corn, beans, etc. That those tests aren't as readily available as what they should be yet. And most of them aren't that crazy expensive. They're just harder to get, and harder to get the labs to run them. And it's something when I get calm things down, it's something that we're probably just going to add, because some of those enzyme tests, I mean the bench tests, they're less than $5,000, but for us they can really propel what we're doing on a farmer basis. And that we have some genetic models that are kind of just sitting there right now, but wanted to pair that, and then we've also got some new models that we've just started using with a couple growers, of pairing that genetic model with their own genetic model of the soil. But part of the problem that I have with ag is that we make $1 million decisions off of non-statistically relevant data every single day. That we've got 160 acres of land, and we may pull a sample, or if we're lucky, we grid sample it. But for the most part, we're looking at we measure and then we manipulate it. And that works really well for synthetics. It's horrible for biology.
The bigger scale like extract specifically, are you trying to filter enough down?
Is that still good? Yes, but we know that we can get much higher bump, and so that's why we want to partner with others as well. So we usually recommend, so we've seen the best light, we don't want to go and over agitate it, because the more we agitate it, we lose our hyphae. And so if we can turn the whole system over once a day, that's kind of ideal. Now, one wild card of that is that what particulate level, and we're always pushing as much particulate as you can get. With some extractors out there, they want to be at 50 mesh or even 80 mesh, or they'll use a bag and they're trying to get the particulate out of the system. But we believe that the particulate is where a lot of that magic happens. It's where we see potassium mobilization with biochar, we see more on the cation exchanges, but we need the particulate, especially the biochar, because it's not a soluble solvent. Now, our cations as a whole are very soluble, but also when you take 2,000 pounds and 1,000 of it becomes soluble, all of a sudden you've got a lot that's moving around. And so if you're only turning over once a day, you're going to end up with a sludge at the bottom of it. So that's where that wild card comes in, that what did you originally filter sushi down to, how long is it really going to stay in the tank, and then design that turnover based off of that.
How do you get the algae level higher? I'm just curious.